I've got some disturbing news surrounding England's royal family. Queen Camilla believed the meeting had faded completely into secrecy. No witnesses, no official documentation, and no reason for King Charles or Prince William ever to learn what she had pledged to Harry behind closed doors. But inside a secured palace file were signatures, confidential directions, and a handwritten message that transformed suspicion into evidence. When the folder was finally opened before the Royal Council, Camilla was no longer facing rumors. She had been caught red-handed. Before we uncover what this could mean for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles felt the atmosphere in the room tighten as a restricted folder was placed in front of him during an urgent meeting at Buckingham Palace. The palace was more than a royal residence. It served as the operational centre of the monarchy, where private family decisions could quickly carry institutional consequences. He opened the seal, recognized Camilla's personal mark, and discovered Harry's name scattered across documents that should never have existed. The king examined the signed agreement once, then read it again. His fingers paused over a sentence promising palace access, financial assistance, and selected royal responsibilities in exchange for silence concerning private conversations about the Queen's future position. William watched as his father lowered the papers without saying a word. The Royal Council, made up of senior advisors assisting the sovereign with sensitive matters, remained completely still while the future king observed every reaction around the table. This was more than a concealed conversation. It threatened the authority that would eventually shape the monarchy after Charles because Camilla had offered access that was not hers to grant and protection she had no power to guarantee. William saw disbelief disappear from his father's expression and something closer to pain take its place. That quiet transformation carried greater force than any outburst could have. Camilla entered later believing she was attending a routine briefing. She walked only a few steps before noticing the open folder. Then she froze when she saw her signature positioned beside Harry's name. The Queen attempted to speak, but Charles raised a handwritten instruction before she could explain herself. The note directed palace staff to keep the arrangement hidden from William until the conditions had been completed. Camilla looked toward the prince and then back at her husband, realizing that the document had eliminated any possibility of denial. Charles turned toward a second sealed page but refused to read its contents aloud. That page detailed what Harry had supposedly agreed to surrender, including records serious enough to make Camilla gamble with both her marriage and her authority. William leaned forward and noticed a reference to a conversation that had taken place months earlier on an evening everyone had considered completely ordinary. The secret had not started with the folder. It had begun long before anyone inside the palace became suspicious. But before the palace could understand why Camilla had risked her marriage, her influence, and the confidence of the future king, everyone first had to understand what each person feared losing. The agreement itself was explosive, but signatures alone could not explain the desperation behind it. Camilla feared losing the influence she had spent years establishing. Harry wanted a doorway reopened after becoming convinced that every official route back into royal life had been closed. Charles now confronted the painful possibility that his wife and younger son had negotiated around him. And William recognized that the concealed bargain was not simply about reconciliation. It concerned power after Charles. The king stood alone near a palace window, holding his glasses loosely in one hand as though even their weight had suddenly become exhausting. His confidence in Camilla had long protected her position because a queen's influence depended not only on ceremonial status but also on the sovereign's personal trust. Charles eventually folded his glasses and admitted to William that betrayal from strangers would have been easier to endure than betrayal from members of his own family. William heard no rage in his father's voice. That absence disturbed him even more. Camilla remained inside a private drawing room, her hands tightly clasped as she struggled between defending herself and admitting what she had done. She understood that the agreement could never completely restore Harry to official royal life because participation in the working monarchy, the family members performing formal duties, required direct approval from a sovereign. Still, she had offered enough to attract him: financial support, private access, and a concealed route around William. She had spent years building influence, and now a single signature threatened everything. Harry's name appeared repeatedly throughout the documents, but only Camilla's authorization had released palace resources. That detail placed the greatest responsibility on her. Harry had obvious reasons to accept the arrangement because every formal route back appeared blocked and repeated attempts involving his brother had failed. But Harry had not approved the money. He had not instructed palace employees to conceal the arrangement. Camilla had. William continued through the documents and discovered something even more serious. The agreement guaranteed Harry a private meeting with Charles despite the king never approving such an audience. William immediately understood the significance. A private audience with the sovereign could easily be presented as evidence of forgiveness, renewed authority, or an approaching royal return before any formal decision had actually been made. Then William noticed the date written beside Camilla's signature. It corresponded with the evening of an important royal ceremony, a night when both Camilla and Harry had briefly disappeared from separate engagements. William pointed toward the date, looked directly at his father, and asked one quiet question. Where was she that evening? The answer led back to a ceremony remembered for its magnificence, but now destined to become remembered as the night the hidden bargain truly began. Months before the documents emerged, the royal family had gathered beneath centuries of tradition, believing their greatest threats remained beyond palace walls. A message arrived. A corridor was cleared. Camilla quietly stepped away from the ceremony, and Harry answered a telephone call he had reportedly been waiting weeks to receive. What happened next became a turning point neither could easily deny. For weeks, Camilla had been privately disagreeing with William about Harry's future. She feared that continued rejection might push Harry toward another damaging disclosure. William, however, believed pressure and threats could never become a legitimate path back into royal life. Charles had repeatedly made his own position clear. Any genuine reconciliation had to involve honesty, accountability, and William's full awareness. The king wanted peace, but he would not purchase peace through secrecy. That position left Camilla caught between her husband's boundaries and her own growing anxiety. A handwritten message arrived during a Commonwealth reception at Buckingham Palace. The event was a formal gathering honouring countries connected through the Commonwealth, but behind the ceremony Camilla focused only on the warning written across the folded paper. Harry was prepared to speak. Camilla left the ballroom, entered the Queen's private sitting room, and shut the door before reaching for the telephone. No aide remained inside. No formal record was supposed to survive. Harry answered immediately. He told Camilla that William intended to permanently prevent his return and accused the future king of using security arrangements, royal responsibilities, and family access against him. Camilla listened before revealing the fear she had kept from everyone else. She believed that once Charles's reign ended, William would push her aside, reduce her influence, and dismantle the authority she had spent years establishing. Harry recognized the vulnerability in her words, and Camilla recognized opportunity in his silence. Music from the reception could barely be heard beyond the closed doors as she realized the husband she was defying remained only rooms away. Even so, she made the offer. At that moment, the arrangement stopped being emotional. It became deliberate. A junior courtier later saw Camilla leaving the sitting room with the folded message hidden inside her glove. He entered the unusual movement into a confidential duty log, a record used by palace employees to document unexpected instructions or activity. Camilla apparently never realized that this small entry would remain. After ending the call, she stood beside the silent telephone and crushed the handwritten message in her hand. Then she returned to the reception wearing a composed expression, unaware that the first piece of evidence had already been created. Now, with the damaged message reconstructed and the agreement exposed, Camilla could no longer escape the confrontation waiting behind the council chamber doors. The palace had endured scandals, departures, and public accusations before. But this conflict reached closer than most previous crises. William did not enter merely as an heir defending an institution. He entered as a son who believed his father had been deceived, and as a future monarch whose authority had been privately negotiated without his knowledge. Camilla stood opposite him with nowhere left to retreat. Charles watched the two people closest to him prepare for confrontation. He shut the doors and dismissed every advisor except one trusted secretary. The king wanted no crowd of officials softening what had happened, and no carefully selected language transforming betrayal into administrative procedure. The signed agreement remained on the table between them, together with the concealed instruction ordering staff to bypass William. The royal secretary, responsible for documenting decisions and managing highly sensitive palace matters, remained silent as Charles placed a finger against the document and asked Camilla whether the words belonged to her. William did not allow the conversation to drift toward excuses. He asked whether she had promised Harry influence over future royal decisions in return for protecting confidential comments concerning William's eventual reign. The answer mattered deeply. If access to the monarchy could be negotiated before William became king, then his future authority had already been compromised. Camilla insisted she had been attempting to prevent damaging recordings from becoming public. She claimed Harry possessed conversations capable of destroying trust within the family. Charles stared at her coldly. Fear, he told her, did not justify deception. Then William reached toward the second sealed document. He opened it and discovered the exact conditions Harry had supposedly agreed to fulfill. Recorded conversations. Handwritten notes. Copies of private messages exchanged with Camilla. William read each item carefully, forcing her to confront the full scale of what had been negotiated. Eventually, Camilla acknowledged that the material existed. She admitted Harry possessed words spoken during moments of anger and anxiety, remarks she believed might someday be used against her after Charles was gone. William pushed his chair backward and rose above the document. His voice remained controlled, but his question carried more force than shouting could have. Had she promised Harry William's future simply to protect her own? Camilla lowered her gaze instead of answering. Charles watched her silence settle over the table like a judgment. The king then asked whether any palace money, property, or access had already been provided. Camilla's hands tightened. She waited too long before responding. And within that hesitation, both Charles and William understood. The arrangement had already moved beyond words. That silence transformed the entire situation because the next discovery suggested the bargain had already started influencing palace operations. Royal power rarely moves through shouting. It operates through signatures, access lists, private secretaries, financial approvals, and decisions completed before the public even knows they exist. Camilla did not possess enough authority to fully restore Harry, but she had enough influence to quietly unlock doors others believed were firmly closed. Charles now needed to discover exactly how far that influence had extended and whether palace staff had followed her instructions. Within the hour, the king summoned his private secretary. Charles struggled to maintain his composure as he asked whether palace employees had acted on instructions issued under Camilla's authority. Her household managed selected charitable resources, guest access, correspondence, and private scheduling connected with her official responsibilities. A royal household is essentially the administrative and staff structure supporting a senior royal, and that system had apparently given Camilla enough reach to operate discreetly without openly challenging the king. The secretary placed another leather folder before Charles and admitted that one particular request had concerned him. He had questioned why accommodation and security arrangements were being prepared for Harry without any formal family decision. Yet he had said nothing. Challenging Camilla, he explained, had seemed dangerously close to challenging Charles himself. The king listened without interrupting. That admission exposed an even deeper problem. Staff had not simply obeyed the Queen. They had assumed her influence represented the king's approval. William entered while financial records were being reviewed. He discovered that money from a private charitable reserve had been designated to cover Harry's accommodation, transportation, and security during an undisclosed visit. The reserve was intended for approved charitable or official activity, not confidential family negotiations. William immediately recognized the seriousness. Once palace resources became involved, the arrangement was no longer simply a private promise. It had become an action conducted through royal infrastructure. Another document revealed something even more alarming. A guest authorization had already been prepared under a misleading administrative description, allowing Harry to enter a royal residence without appearing. Camilla had not officially restored him. The secretary admitted that the authorization had been prepared for a particular date. Charles asked where Harry was supposed to go. William read the location first. It was not Buckingham Palace. Harry had reportedly been directed toward a residence containing private family archives and correspondence associated with Diana. William's expression immediately hardened. Those documents carried both historical and deeply personal significance, and no secret visitor should have been able to approach them without authorization. Then he placed it beside the agreement and instructed the secretary to suspend every directive carrying her private seal. The order stopped the administrative machinery, but it could not prevent the emotional collapse already unfolding behind the palace's closed doors. By evening, no public announcement had been released. Yet everything around Camilla had changed. Telephone calls were redirected. Briefings were delayed. Staff members who once approached her freely now waited for written authorization. For the first time since becoming queen, she experienced how quickly royal influence could disappear once the trust supporting it was removed. Charles temporarily excluded her from sensitive family briefings and suspended her authority over confidential access arrangements. Those briefings contained security information, family movements, and future royal schedules. Access arrangements determined who could enter protected residences without public knowledge. Trust had once allowed Camilla to operate freely within that system. Now that trust had been replaced by suspicion. William acted quickly as well. He ordered a complete review of communications exchanged between Camilla's household and Harry during the previous 12 months. The investigation would examine messages, schedules, instructions, spending records, approvals, and any concealed channels used to keep William outside the decision-making process. Camilla returned to her private rooms and stopped beside the table where her red dispatch box normally rested. The box traditionally carried confidential royal documents requiring attention. But its usual place was empty. She instinctively reached toward the space before slowly pulling her hand back. A long-time aide entered moments later. Camilla asked whether Charles intended to remove her from public responsibilities. The aide could not meet her eyes. That silence provided no reassurance. Then Harry's message arrived. It contained no apology and showed little concern about what had unfolded inside the palace. Instead, he demanded that Camilla honor their agreement and reminded her that preparations for his journey had already begun. Harry still expected access, financial support, and the private meeting he believed he had been promised. Camilla read the message twice. She realized that Harry did not view the exposure as the end of their arrangement. He saw it as pressure to complete the bargain more quickly. William soon discovered why. Travel arrangements associated with Harry had reportedly been organized days earlier, including a provisional security request and a concealed arrival period. The prince understood that Harry's secret visit had not been some distant possibility. It might have been only days away. Then Charles received a personal letter from his younger son. The king refused to open it in front of advisors. Instead, he carried it into a private room, looked toward William, and asked him to follow. Behind them, Camilla remained beside the empty table as her aide quietly shut the door. Yet the decisive moment would not come through another formal council meeting. It would emerge from a private conversation between father and son, without advisors present to absorb the emotional weight. For years, Charles had attempted to stand between his sons, absorbing their anger while hoping time might soften what pride had hardened. But inside the private library, with Harry's unopened letter sitting between them, Charles could no longer delay making a choice. William did not demand punishment. He demanded honesty. And during the silence that followed, Charles finally understood that shielding everyone from consequences had only allowed the deepest problems to grow. Charles locked the library door and dismissed every secretary, legal advisor, and court official. No institution would speak for him now. The private library was not an official council chamber. It was a family space where difficult conversations could take place without formal minutes or official witnesses. Charles sat opposite William with Harry's letter between them and finally admitted the fear beneath his anger. If he rejected the arrangement, Charles said, he might lose his younger son permanently. The confession emerged slowly. He was mourning the possibility that there might no longer be anything left to repair. William responded carefully. He told Charles that reconciliation created through secrecy would never genuinely restore the family. Without honesty, reconciliation would reward pressure and make every future commitment meaningless. Harry's return could not be permitted to undermine royal authority. And Camilla's fear could not become permission to exchange palace access for silence. Charles listened as his elder son explained that avoiding painful decisions had only pushed those problems deeper into the family. Finally, the king opened Harry's letter. Harry asked his father to preserve the agreement, arguing that Camilla had created the only realistic path around William's resistance. The letter also included copies of private comments attributed to Camilla from recorded conversations and written notes. The material might have been used as leverage against the Queen. Charles pushed it aside. He refused to respond to one secret threat by participating in another. At that moment, his decision became firm. He would terminate the agreement, confront Harry directly, and demand complete disclosure from both Harry and Camilla. Charles signed an instruction ending every unofficial negotiation concerning royal access. The sovereign's order meant that no household or family member could continue the arrangement without the king's direct authorization. Charles tore the unsigned approval page into two pieces and placed them beside Harry's letter. There would be no more secret agreements. William then asked what would happen to Camilla. Charles answered immediately. She would remain beside him. But the unrestricted influence she had previously enjoyed was finished. The official statement contained no direct accusation, yet its implications were immediately understood. An unauthorized arrangement had been terminated. Royal access procedures had been reviewed. The king had introduced new restrictions within his own household. By sunrise, Camilla's private gamble had become one of the biggest royal stories across Britain. But a newspaper headline, a gathering outside Buckingham Palace, and one broadcaster's striking statement transformed internal palace discipline into a national controversy. Camilla watched the morning coverage alone. The palace announcement confirmed that all unauthorized negotiations concerning Harry had been terminated, and that only Charles could approve future royal access. That distinction mattered. Entry into royal residences was not simply equivalent to receiving a family invitation. It could communicate legitimacy, acceptance, and potentially a pathway toward public royal duties. The announcement also confirmed changes to Camilla's household responsibilities. Staff, financial resources, and access arrangements previously handled under her authority would now receive direct supervision. Commentators described the development as one of the strongest restrictions placed on her influence since she became queen. Camilla heard every word. Harry responded from abroad through a recorded statement delivered to his legal representatives. He accused the palace of destroying what he described as a private path toward reconciliation. According to Harry, the arrangement had provided the first genuine opportunity to repair the family. Charles refused to respond publicly. The king understood that an emotional public reaction might transform internal discipline into spectacle. Silence had become one of the few forms of control remaining. Then the newspaper front pages appeared. One national paper reportedly carried the headline, "The Queen's Secret Pact," alongside an image of Camilla leaving a royal engagement with a tense expression. The story gained power because the public now believed royal access had nearly been exchanged for silence. Public sympathy quickly divided. Some observers saw desperation and fear. Others interpreted the situation as manipulation. Very few regarded Camilla as entirely innocent. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered as broadcasters delivered live coverage. The palace represented not only the monarch's central working residence but one of the most recognizable symbols of royal authority. That gave every reaction outside its gates unusual significance. One correspondent summarized the crisis with a devastating observation. The king appeared to have chosen the credibility of the monarchy over secrecy within his own household. The statement quickly spread through television coverage, radio discussion, and social media. Camilla lowered the television volume but did not switch it off. Harry continued presenting his argument through representatives, while Charles remained publicly quiet and privately determined. Behind closed doors, the monarch prepared one final decision, one that would define Camilla's authority, Harry's future, and the principle governing the royal family from that moment forward. The public had already formed its judgment, but only Charles could determine what the scandal would ultimately mean and what would remain after the anger faded. His final decision was neither exile nor unconditional forgiveness. Charles understood that destroying Camilla would not undo the betrayal. Secretly welcoming Harry back would not repair the family either. The monarchy could survive anger. It could survive embarrassment. What it could not survive was a system where silence could be purchased and trust negotiated behind closed doors. So Charles selected a consequence measured not through humiliation but through lasting institutional change. Every commitment made to Harry under the secret arrangement was formally cancelled. Charles informed his younger son through a signed personal letter that any future communication would have to occur openly, directly, and without hidden conditions. A sovereign's personal instruction carried the authority of the monarch, and this one left no concealed pathway behind it. The royal door was not permanently closed, but it would never again be opened through threats, private recordings, or secret agreements. Camilla remained queen and continued performing public duties. However, the authority surrounding her changed significantly. She no longer possessed independent control over sensitive family access, selected private funds, or confidential negotiations involving senior members of the royal family. Her title remained. The freedom beneath that title had narrowed. Charles preserved their marriage but refused to preserve the system that had allowed fear to become deception. Camilla eventually met her husband alone and stopped trying to defend her actions. She admitted that fear had influenced her decisions. Fear that Harry might release damaging conversations. Fear about William's future reign. and fear of losing the position she had spent years securing. Charles listened before telling her what she had failed to recognize. By attempting to protect her position through secrecy, she had nearly destroyed the trust that gave that position its real power. William entered the final meeting with controlled restraint. Camilla apologized directly to him. She offered no justification and placed no responsibility on Harry. William accepted the apology but made one point unmistakably clear. Trust would not return simply because she had apologized. It would need to be rebuilt through honesty, actions, and time. William left knowing that his father had finally defended the authority of the next reign rather than delaying another confrontation. Charles then placed the cancelled agreement inside a black archive box marked "Cancelled by the Sovereign." The words indicated that the monarch had formally terminated the document's authority. Charles locked the box. Then he handed the key to William. In that single gesture, Harry lost the hidden pathway he had attempted to secure. Camilla lost the unchecked influence she had once possessed. And Charles finally stopped confusing protection with avoidance. With that final turn of the key, the secret agreement came to an end. Not through the collapse of the crown, but through a clear royal verdict. Loyalty without truth was no loyalty at all. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.